That's what this affidavit is. It's the conversation of saying, I don't agree with what you're doing and you're harming me.
It's unacceptable.
And people think they need to have a big story to say I've been harmed, but we really don't. People have been restricted on education, commerce, religion, relationships, funerals, weddings, baptisms, church, celebratory things, whatever. We've been restricted on living, on our movement, where we can stand, how close, how far apart, our breathing. To say the least, our breathing. All we're asking for is a rescindment of the mandates and the rhetoric and the stopping of terrorizing people and focusing on deaths and cases. Just stop. Right. We don't talk about cancer this way or heart disease this way.
Or the flu
the flu's cured.
You're listening to A Real Human Being, a podcast about conversation and connection and being human. My name is Josh Putnam, and I believe that everybody is worth listening to. That connection is powerful and healing, and that we need each other. Hi, everyone. Welcome into the show today. I have a special guest on with me, someone that I'm excited to talk to, somebody that I've never actually talked to yet, but I've communicated with her over social media, Facebook, and just really been excited about and grateful for the work that she's been doing this year. And I wanted to bring her on and have a conversation about all of these things. So this is Alena. And I didn't ask you if it was okay if I use your last name or not. I don't.
Yeah, that's
okay,
fine.
Alena Ericksen. Some people, again, it's being on social media. Some people are understandably, careful. So, but yeah. So this is Alena Ericksen. So welcome. Thank you for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is my honor. So let's get started. Let's just have you kind of introduce yourself a little bit, kind of your background, where you came from, and then we'll get into 2020 and all of the craziness that went on there and what you were up to during the year. So, what's your story?
Well, I am a mother of 6 children. The ages of my children range from 14 to 23.
Okay.
And I've been a stay-at-home mom for years. I've been working on getting my education, and I'm halfway through a grad program for clinical mental health counseling.
Okay.
And I'm also a master herbalist, a hypnotist. My undergrad
really?
is, yeah.
Wow, very interesting.
My undergrad
Maybe we'll get into that later. That's very cool. Yeah. Sorry.
My undergrad is marriage and family studies. So at the heart of who I am and what I believe in is really the essence of humanity, and that's family, relationships, connections. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I've always felt a kinship to the founding fathers and to liberty. There's just something that's just resonates with me, and I feel that connection too. Yeah. And so when 2020 began, I was just coming out of an internship for my undergrad at a addiction recovery center in Salt Lake City, and that opened my eyes to the need for human connection. And just with what those people struggle with and go through, and my heart went out to them. And so obviously in March, I finished with that program late February, and then March the lockdowns came, and I decided to spend some time at home with my family and just revert my focus to that. But it awoken me to maybe a calling, if you will. And so politics have interested, they've always been of interest to me, but I've never really actually dove into it. Mm-hmm. And I think I just felt the prompting to get on social media and to gather, educate, and band together. It was really the only way we could.
Yeah.
With the isolations, and the lockdowns, and it was the only way people could. And I think people were drawn to that because they needed to feel that community, connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just kind of started writing posts that came to me, and eventually I got invites for public speaking engagements, and I accepted those, and just one thing led to another. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the affidavit, I have a few people that I work with that it was actually his idea, and he's been kind of a mentor to me in natural law.
Okay.
And I kind of ran with that. So that's just a summary of my story.
Yeah, kind of how you got here. Wow, that is very cool. I didn't realize that you had worked in an addiction recovery unit there. And you're speaking of that realization of our need for connection, I think is kind of it's at the root and the core of what I'm trying to do here, because I've recognized. So my journey is quite different, but like I started studying and researching health somewhere 8 or 9 years ago, pretty intensively because of my own mental health issues, and I was seeing the kind of the responses to that in the medical community, and I wasn't liking the results, and I just it didn't all add up to me, and so I needed to do my own research, try to understand what was going on. And one of the biggest elements to health and healing, and particularly to mental health, is that connection with other human beings, but like real, vulnerable, good, healthy connection. And so that's been kind of at underlying all of my, especially definitely this podcast, but it was kind of a driving force. But as we moved into and through 2020 and seeing what was going on and the reactions to COVID by government leaders and such, and the disconnection that came there. And I mean, I felt it myself, certainly, but we've, you hear about, if you were looking for it, you heard about the increase in suicide, for one thing, right? I mean, the huge increase there, and in mental health, intense mental health issues grew exponentially, I think, in this last year. And so that's sort of, I was already kind of in my studies of health, I already felt kind of pulled into this conversation or even fight, which I was reluctant to join, surrounding health in general. So I felt like it was just kind of a continuation of that when we started moving into 2020, as seeing the responses from government and how they were impacting the real world, the real people. And so when I saw your stuff on, I think it was Facebook that I found you, I was drawn to it, and so excited and grateful that you were doing the things that you were doing. So thank you for all that.
Well, you're welcome. I deeply care about people, and improving our communities, as well as restoring what's rightfully ours.
Yeah.
And I think what's been most surprising about me and with this experience is collecting the affidavits.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have said, I just don't have a story. I'm like,
right.
You do have a story.
Yeah.
Because I think at the very essence, what we have to understand is whatever you believe your higher power to be, that precedes government.
Mm-hmm.
And John Locke was, the philosopher that just made the impression upon our founding fathers to really implement the government or the system to protect who we are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is man? What is woman? We are a combination of our ambitions and our personality and our capabilities. And with that, we produce our property. Yes, our body is our property, but we produce property through those ambitions of who we really are. And so, our founding fathers and John Locke, they understood how sacred that relationship of our personal journey on earth is.
Yeah.
And that government was instituted to protect that and to not, shrink that or restrain it, but actually to enlarge freedom.
Absolutely. I mean, amen on that one. I've been a fan of John Locke for a long time, but I haven't been as thorough and committed to my readings of that era particularly. But when I was younger, I used to read his treatises on government, and he was brilliant, and all of the kind of the founding father era writings particularly are just magnificent, and I think should all be reading that stuff more than we are, to give us a greater understanding and appreciation for, particularly in America, why the government was founded the way it was. And you spoke to it there. It was to protect the individual. It was to protect freedom, and that was it. It was to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that was all. And the rest was up to us, And so I just, I like that you said that. That's beautiful.
Well, and that's the important thing to know, because in order for my effort and to be successful, people have to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so this affidavit project, that is the foundation, is understanding natural law, understanding government. They are our employees. They work for us. They serve us. They have an oath to obey the Constitution and to protect our liberties.
Yeah.
And really, our life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness according to the dictates of our conscience.
Yeah.
And so government just needs to get out of the way, and then people can do great things.
Right. Now, and I get that. So the world feels so complicated now, and I think that that's the argument that's often made for more regulation, more government involvement, right? Well, but what about cyber terrorism or the threat of what about I mean, you worked in the addiction community, or a community, I don't know, but like and saw so much of the kind of devastation and destruction that brings, and we need to be able to address these societal issues and create regulations that maybe prohibit or regulate opioids is a big one here in Utah, I know, especially, or things like that. So I get the conversation, but can you speak to that from your experience, especially as you worked with those who were addicted, and what is the response there? Why do we not necessarily need more government, but we can address the issues without them stepping in?
Well, what I found is the biggest hurdle for the, and I don't want to call them addicts. I don't like labels.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all have a tendency to have an addiction to something.
Yes. Some are just more socially acceptable than others, right?
Right. And you hit it right there. We need to change the attitude in society, because if these people cannot be given a chance in society, how can they recover? Mm-hmm. If they have a label attached to them, I dare say even the label of a felony, if that stays with somebody forever, then what gives them the hope? It brings in the conversation of Les Mis.
Yes.
And how he was struggling to overcome this life sentence of a label. And is it, yes, what is that balance? There's a dance between law and God's law. Yeah. And Jean Valjean, he had to wrestle with that. And so we feel with him in that journey. And so really the humanity of helping people overcome is, I think, having the compassion and the charity to overlook and to be willing to give these people a chance within society, to integrate them. But one of the most devastating things that COVID did was it shut down businesses, shut down hiring. some restaurant owners say, hey, we've actually done better in 2020. Well, is it because
Right.
the most vulnerable are put at risk of losing their job? With curbside and takeout,
Mm-hmm.
now we've eliminated a lot of the waitresses, waiters, dish
Mm-hmm.
boys, bus boys, like all that kind of stuff. We've eliminated that. So of
Right.
course they're absorbing more money that way.
Their overhead went down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
True.
so, it's a hard thing. I've thought about it a lot with government and the relationship with programs such as addiction recovery.
Right.
I think, ultimately, I would love to see less government and more family, community, and
Yeah.
church involvement.
Yeah. I think you hit it on the head there. It's community, right? Because even with a government program, it I think is almost completely ineffective if there's no community around, like to help support, right? Um, I mean, how many
Well,
people do you see in the system who end up just back where they started, because even after going through a government program, um, because it didn't stick, or it didn't last, or didn't work for them.
mhm, mhm. Well, and I think we also have to eliminate the government programs that are enabling the cyclic patterns that we're seeing of addiction or dysfunctional living.
Mm,
If we have programs that are an incentive to have children but not get married,
yeah,
and we take fathers out of the home,
yeah,
then we're supporting that behavior, and
right,
there's no accountability. And so, yeah, getting rid of those kinds of things is key. And really, I think instead of focusing so much on what's not working, they've done studies. Instead of focusing so much on what's not working, maybe we need to focus on what is working. What is
yeah,
our strength? You turn on the news and I don't, but if
yeah,
people turn on the news, it's so negative.
yeah,
And really, there's for every one bad thing, there's probably 1,000 good people doing something good.
yeah.
And I think our focus needs to change on that. And we need to stop giving the spotlight to criminal behavior as well, and to negativity. So,
Mm. That's interesting, because like this whole year for me, or this past year, it's felt like such a, like the lesson that I have learned, or the issue that has become so clear to me, for me specifically, has been, how do I find the balance between standing and even fighting, if need be, for the things that I believe are right and true, freedom um, uh, and our rights, but also then still be compassionate and kind at the same time. Because I mean, I'm genuinely torn between these two things quite often. And I think that I think that this is a conversation you see on social media all the time, particularly as we start talking about mask mandates and all of that, or just wearing masks in general, right? Oh, you wear a mask for other people because you have to protect them and be kind. And so the argument is this kind of emotion-based argument of, um, are you compassionate? If you're not, if you are compassionate, then you will do this. And if you don't do this, then you are not compassionate and you don't care about people. And so I think that you get just an enormous amount of people who otherwise would make a different decision going along with a like the mask mandate, because they feel, well, but I'm compassionate. I need to be compassionate. I need to be kind and show my love for people, because that's most important. And to me, like, this is why I get so torn, because it's like, I totally agree. It is so important, and to me it is. I feel moved by that. I want to make sure that people are taken care of. I want that they are safe and that they are healthy and happy, and but at the same time, I have, or I should say, and at the same time, I have a deep, deep conviction for and passion for freedom and truth and standing for what is right. And I think that what happens, especially it feels in the Christian community is that it's easy for us to be manipulated by this ideology of just be compassionate, just love. And yeah, I guess that's really all I would want to do.
I think, it's interesting because I've thought a lot about this and the brilliance of what has happened with the coercion, because you're absolutely right. Even the founders knew that in order to trust people into a new kind of government that had never been experimented, they had to trust that humans were innately good.
Yeah.
That they would want to do the right thing and that they would want to care for each other. But the catchphrase right there is to live life according to the dictates of conscience. Right. So yes, there's a collective effort to be morally sound and morally correct, but it's an individual effort. Does that make sense? It's yes. We're directed individually according to our conscience, our relationship with our Creator. And so I'm going to say that the difference between socialism and service when talking about being charitable is one is forced and one is a choice.
Yes.
And I will always, that's why liberty is so important.
Yes.
I don't care if I would prefer people to not wear a mask because I see the psychological effects of what's happening in society, the disconnect. People aren't talking, they're not smiling, they're not connecting. They're afraid of each other. They're even if you're not afraid of the virus, just what you said, I better stay away from people now.
Yeah.
And we could go into a whole other spill about the numbers of this virus and how legitimate really are we in a state of a threat for lives, and preserving lives. And so I find that you can win any argument by just embracing liberty, which is really agency to choose, choose what is right for you. And there is one thing, and since you mentioned Christianity, there's a parable, the 10 virgins I've been really thinking about. And all 10 were religious, but only 5 were prepared with the oil. And that could be symbolic and that can mean something different to each one of us. But I believe in this context, what that could mean, and I've thought about it, is I cannot give somebody their physical health. That is earned through drop by drop, through choices, through practices, through routines, through healthy living, diet, exercise, sunshine, positive thinking, fresh air, healthy relationships. Those things contribute to health, and I can't give that to somebody.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a deception to think that we're protecting somebody else's immune system.
Yeah.
And are we so fragile that God failed us that we need to put our trust in man? Right. And that's where I stand. I think we have a brilliant immune system.
I mean, amen. Totally. I mean, couldn't have said it better myself. I think that is as I mentioned, my journey and learning about health and studying about health is that there's a doctor who I hope to someday have on here. He was just brilliant, and I admire him so much. His name is Zach Bush, and he opened my eyes to just so many things. But the premise is the way to create health or to be healthy is through the supporting of and the diversifying of the microbiome and the virome. So you have both of these microbiological communities living in and on your body, every second of every day. And it turns out we have this flawed, skewed understanding of what those things are, what they do, and what their purpose or their design was. And that comes from, there's this conversation that went back to Louis Pasteur, germ theory versus terrain theory, where what you're speaking about is terrain theory. Where does health come from? It comes from right choices, healthy living, healthy diet, lifestyle, exercise, positive thoughts, all of that stuff. And that is where our health will be won or lost, or maintained or supported or lost. And so you actually see, as you look at this microbiological world, that it is not our enemy. It is actually our friend. We need it. And it supports our health and it strengthens us if we live in ways that support it, which is to allow for biodiversity, to, and that speaks to the whole mask or the social distancing issue as well, where how do you create a robust and diverse microbiome? Well, you have to expose your body and your immune system to all kinds of different environments, biologically. So different people, and they carry different specific bacteria and viruses, and as we breathe in their immediate environment and they breathe in ours, we create and cultivate this biodiversity. And that's what actually creates this strength of our immune system. And so now we've come and said, it's bad, it's dangerous, it's trying to kill us, and we need to distance from everybody. And we need to stay inside, and we need to mask up, and we need to, and all of these responses are actually creating the opposite result from what we were hoping it would, which is to actually decrease our health,
Well, and interesting, I was on a podcast several months ago towards the beginning of this, and we talked about the efficiency of masks, and there really is not a proven study of it. But
right.
And again, even though I don't like masks and I wish we could all just throw them away, I'm not telling anybody they can't do it if they're comfortable. But Harvard, I believe it was Harvard. It was Harvard or Yale, one of the, big Ivy League universities. Yeah. They did a study with mice about this very thing with our microbiome and terrain theory. And they wanted to see the relationship between our skin biome and the gut biome, because 90% of our immune system is in our intestines.
Yeah.
So they took 2 sets of mice, and one group was just living like they normally would in dirt and, just, like they normally would.
Yeah.
And then the other was in a really isolated, pristine,
sterile,
clean, sterile environment. And they tested the skin and the gut biome from both of them, and it was always parallel. So, and interestingly enough, when they tried to introduce bacterias to both sets of mice, the ones that were sterile really struggled with fighting it, because they didn't have, like you said, their body had not developed immunity or practice. It's like a muscle, it needs to be exercised.
Right. Yep.
And so then the mice that were in that natural environment, they were able to fight it. Well, they decided to administer an antibiotic to both. And they were assuming to find that within the gut, it would wipe out the microbiome, as antibiotics do. But what they found is that the microbiome on the skin actually correlated. They didn't expect the skin to reduce in efficiency, but it did.
Right.
So there's some kind of relationship between the microbiome and the on the skin and in the gut. It's interesting.
Very interesting, because they're in communication. It's like a network. I mean, and you find this. So Dr. Bush's, one of his some quote that he had said a while back was something about like the more I look into the microbiome and human health, and the deeper I dig, every time it comes back to the soil and to soil health. And you look at I'm really into gardening and permaculture, and the lessons we learn there are just beautiful as they relate to human health, the diversity and the kind of the synergistic communal sort of environment or health interaction that is supposed to be there and that naturally will be there, is astounding. And in nature, everything works together just beautifully and helps each other become and stay healthy and thrive and be well. And it's when we get involved as human beings and we start saying, oh no, look, this person died and they had this bacteria. therefore the bacteria was the cause, therefore bacteria are bad, therefore we need to kill them all. And we start going in and we start trying to kill everything, and antibiotics, like you mentioned, and it ends up in the long run creating just devastation. And the system becomes unsustainable. So then we have to keep inputting more and more, and we get sicker and sicker, and there's less and less health. And that works. That's just kind of a principle of nature, it seems, from the soil to our actual, our bodies. And
well, I heard it best put that with terrain theory, the best way to explain it is it's like blaming the firefighter because he's present when there's a fire.
Right.
So viruses are the most abundant organism on the planet.
Yes.
And there's no way, like, people take off the mask.
Right.
Like, we have lived for ages on this planet with viruses and bacteria, and it's about taking personal responsibility for your health and stop being afraid. Like, fear just lowers your immune system anyway.
Yes, so, absolutely.
And the other concept that our government needs to remember is Cornell Law came up with. They have it in their book. It's called direct threat.
Okay.
And basically, there has to be.
I think you posted about this just recently.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there has to be a due process. You can't just call people a direct threat. I can't just call you a criminal. I can't just assume you are dangerous or assume you are hazardous biologically or physically unless there's a due process.
Yeah.
So we need to it's amazing to me how advanced we've become in society. And yet just in 2020, we've totally rewound the clock on civil rights, on basic biology. Just it's time and obviously there's probably some agendas there.
Right.
So,
and that I think is the hard part, because it's hard to I think it's hard for a lot of people to fathom that there could be people who would be willing to do horrendous things like that, to manipulate and for their own gain, and so I think that's at the root of kind of a resistance to consider conspiracy and things like that. Well, there's no way that would be the case. Let's just calm down and just trust, and everything will be okay. But we've seen time and time again through the pages of history would paint a different picture, for us, that there are plenty of people who do and have and I think would continue to take advantage of and manipulate society at large, or people in specifically for their own agendas. And I think we're definitely seeing, I think that the data and the science, or I would say the lack thereof, is just, it's a big red flag that says something isn't right here. It doesn't all add up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's why the only solution out of this mess will always be agency.
Yeah.
It goes back to what we were saying in the beginning: live life according to the dictates of our conscience. And it is. It's become a big mess, and I'm sad to see, so many. And really, I've developed the opinion that I feel like we need to respect the medical community for what it is. And politicians and ecclesiastic leaders need to stop posing as physicians. They need to stop giving medical claims. They need to stop giving medical advice. They need to stop saying this is a preventative and a cure with this. There's no empirical data to support it.
Right.
And so we have, I think, people who don't want to comply, but they're torn, like you said in the beginning, they're torn between liberty and taking that stand versus being obedient to leaders that they trust.
Yeah.
And so whatever happened to consult your doctor? OSHA used to require that people go get fitted for any kind of mouth covering, face covering, to make sure they were of sound health, make sure they were wearing something properly, like a doctor would have to sign off. And so now we've even bypassed the medical field, and we have 17-year-olds in front of stores acting like they're doctors and making claims of cures and prevention. And Obviously with these mandates and 99% of the population complying, and all of a sudden we have these explosive case numbers, if those are even real. I mean, is that not a red flag?
Right. If it's supposed to be working, I mean, that's what it's supposed to be preventing, right?
Right.
And yet,
Right.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, to continue on that path, one of the, in all of my research, one of the main troubling things that I found was a deep kind of flaw in the foundation of the medical community at large, or the Western medical community at least. And that, I think, is one of the driving forces behind some of the poor decisions, I think, being made, because even many doctors, maybe even most, would cite, not, I guess I wouldn't say most, because there are a lot now that have come out over this last year and said, this is not right, we're not handling this correctly, we shouldn't be, making broad mandates, medical mandates for everybody. But there are still just so many that are of the opinion still that germ theory is accurate, and that it is still, we still need to fight them and kill them, and so it's like on all fronts I feel like there's flawed understanding of what's really going on and what's going to really lead to success and health. And so, like, even the doctors, so many of them are, I think, blinded or deceived by or about what's truly going on and what the best measures would be to take. So it's,
and yet you were mentioning earlier that nature is the perfect teacher.
Yes.
And we're not exempt from nature. I mean, we're very much a part of it, and it's all, you can see the patterns, and you can see, if you pick a tomato off that plant and you remove the life source, I mean, eventually that tomato is going to reach its full capacity, and then it's going to start to shrivel and then start to rot. And that's just the nature and course of things. Human beings are the same way. We're not meant to live forever. But if you pick that tomato off of its life source that's going to give it nutrients, then what happens? Nature destroys that which is weak. Right. And so you even see that in the animal kingdom. If you have fish that are injured or whatever, like they're bleeding or something, either other fish or, nature takes care of it. Yeah. So nature breaks down that which is diseased. Right. And so it goes back to being healthy. And if we're healthy, then nature's not going to break us down. Yes. And so it goes to your point earlier, it's all about our personal responsibility there. Yeah. And that's why it's so dangerous for us to take the responsibility of health out of the individual's hands and put it on the community at large, because it won't lead to health. That's the problem. And it requires us to lose our freedoms and rights and all of that. And so, but when you just say, you got to do it for everybody else, well, it's not going to produce the desired results. And we're seeing that now. Everyone, as you mentioned before, most people are already following all of those protocols, and yet we're still having cases, of course, you mentioned, and we could dig into whether or not those are accurate, but it won't lead to actual sustainable health. And that's, like you said, that's nature's way. It's about the personal responsibility, following the laws of health. Well, and if government was so concerned about our individual health, then, it's interesting, earlier this year, they deemed what was essential and what wasn't, but McDonald's was open. Right. The number one killer in our country is heart disease, and that's 647,000 deaths a year. Yeah. And then cancer is shortly under that at 600,000. Yeah. And yet we have billions of dollars being poured into states for COVID relief. And where is the promotion for health in any of that? Right.
Totally.
It blows my mind. I mean, what could we do in communities? I lived in Vegas for a time, and as you know, it's the most desolate place. It's one
Yeah.
of the most desolate places. But what was really cool is they had an orchard, and they
Okay.
had several trees. Like it was like this community thing. And I thought, community sustainability
Yeah.
is a really cool idea that people, can work together on and make sure that that we're supporting health and we're supporting health practices. And
Yeah. Because that's the only real solution.
yeah,
If we really want help. And I'm of the opinion that the solution to all of our societal ills, the solution is Jesus, but
right,
from a kind of a societal structural standpoint, I think small localized permaculture based community food forest gardens are what, because not only does that provide food for everybody with minimal input, but it supports health. Probably better than anything that we do is what we eat, what we put into our mouths impacts our health more than I think anything else.
and it would bring people together.
Yep.
Instead of making people afraid and hiding in their homes. It would bring people together for a common good.
Absolutely.
For something we need to do anyway. We need to eat.
Yeah.
And then you would build relationships. I mean, it would be a very healthy, lofty goal, but it'd be good.
I just liked what you said about Vegas. I didn't know that they had that, but that's I wish we would have them everywhere. But.
Well, and interestingly enough, in Vegas, because they don't really have winters there were always honeybees.
Yeah.
Because there was always blossoms year round on the different shrubbery, and you would find honeybees. So a lot of people owned hives.
That's cool.
And so it's interesting what you can come up with and do even in the desert.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, nature is so resilient because God is brilliant, and he designed it in a brilliant way, so it can sustain itself wherever it is. If we take our hands off the wheel and leave it alone, or work with it, and use its rules and laws and principles and trust it, So let's jump into the affidavit for a minute. We've kind of touched on that, but I finally was able to get one finished and mailed off. Hopefully you should get it within the next day or two, but and hopefully it works out, and you can let me know if it needs any adjustment. But so kind of explain what it is and why it is there, and how people can find information on it. And I'll put links in the show notes and the description so people can find it. And
okay, perfect. And I'll give you those links.
Okay.
So we have the foundation. Hopefully people are starting to understand and grasp really what a free people is supposed to look like. Because if you understand that, then you're more willing to write an affidavit. To understand government's proper role, and to understand our stewardship over liberty. And this is part of the process. This is the due process. So in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, taking our grievances to our government, that is what we're supposed to do.
Right.
If your employee is not performing in a way that is benefiting the industry or the business or the relationship, and you have to have that conversation. That's what this affidavit is. It's the conversation of saying, I don't agree with what you're doing and you're harming me.
It's unacceptable.
And people think they need to have a big story to say I've been harmed, but we really don't. People have been restricted on education, commerce, religion, relationships, funerals, weddings, baptisms, church celebratory things, whatever. We've been restricted on living, on our movement, where we can stand, how close, how far apart, our breathing. To say the least, our breathing.
Yeah.
And so, to put it into context, if somebody were to come into your home and, hold your kids hostage, hold you hostage, you can't leave your home, you can't shop, you can't talk to anybody, they're going to put, something over your face, a face covering. And, what would you do? The first thing you'd want to do is get the police there.
Yeah.
Right. Well, in essence, this is what the government has done to us.
Yeah.
So my approach is different. This is not a lawsuit. I don't want the litigation expense and years of a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
All I want is to be left alone.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't say something, we're in tacit agreement. We're agreeing to the terms that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so the answer is we, the people. It's educating the people on what a free people are supposed to look like, and then the due process. So with this affidavit, it is your statement that you're being harmed. So we have a beautiful affidavit already written for people. The beginning of it has spiritual, scriptural references. And the reason for that, and people can cut it out, they can customize it the way they want. It doesn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's in a sense our own Declaration of Independence. It's what the founders said to King George.
Right.
That we are creations of a God, that we have that special relationship with him on this journey in life, to live life according to the dictates of conscience, and that government doesn't supersede that. But we also recognize that God is the giver of life, and that we are petitioning his help in this process. And then finally, all government officials who are elected take an oath with their hand on the Bible. All law is founded on biblical principles.
Yeah.
So when you understand those pieces, then it comes together and it makes a lot more sense. So then there's a section, and I'm going to recommend people type it out, because there is not a ton of room. When you pull up the PDF, there's not a lot of room. Copy and paste it onto a Word doc, and then you can type out your grievances. Just be, I was able to fit 20 on mine. And I talked about, not being able to go to church, my children who can't go to school, they're being blacklisted from being able to go to school, not being able to go and engage in commerce freely and contract with businesses freely, being deprived of weddings, funerals, baptisms. Like I said, I mentioned about 20 things, but the important thing when you're writing these is to list the source. So Herbert and Cox.
Mm-hmm.
I know Cox is our new alleged governor, but Herbert also participated in this, and they need an investigation for this. So how I've chosen to word things is because Herbert and Cox have mandated these things. We have the source of the problem, which is Herbert and Cox. We have the problem, whatever the problem is, like what you want to write on your affidavit. And then we have the damage. What is it causing you? Is the mask wearing causing headaches? Is it causing rashes? Is it interfering with your conscience? Like, it's wrong and you hate it, and it feels belittling to do it. Like there's you've got to have what the damage is, because too many people have written these affidavits and they say things like Costco won't let me in.
Right. And they don't.
I was denied service at such and such retailers.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with saying an affidavit like that is our affidavit specifically lists Herbert and Cox. So what does a retailer have to do with Herbert and Cox?
Right.
Now, we know it's because of how they've mandated things. We know that they have conspired against the people with the health department to make threats on fines and closures in business. And so that's why we need to word it applicable. If you have a complaint with Costco, go take it to Costco, but this is about Herbert and Cox, and we need to address it like that.
Yeah.
And then it's just getting 2 witnesses and a notary. And if masks are an issue for people, you can go through the drive-through. You can have a notary come outside. It's easy to do. So
what I did, and this might be an issue, I'm not really sure, but so there was an online service that notarizes. They just do it over webcam.
Oh, okay.
And that's what I did. But the lady who did it was not from Utah. She was from Virginia. So I don't know if she's still a notary, but I don't know if that is going to be an issue or not. But
well, if the police, so I'll say if they have an issue, then they can always address it. There's a space for phone number and address and things like that, because if an investigator needs to call you, if they have any questions or they want to dig into your case a little bit more, they need to be able to get a hold of you.
Okay.
So I can keep all of this confidential. I PDF everything that comes in, and I have compressed things into files. So I met with Sheriff Smith, who's Utah County's sheriff.
Okay.
And again, if this affidavit is the key to act, if we feel like our government has become criminals in the sense of harming people through tyranny, then we have to make a report. That's what the affidavit is it's your witness. When the police comes, after you've called 911 in an emergency or anything, he takes a statement. That's an affidavit. You can also witness the damage to somebody else. So my neighbor lost his entire business, or I have a best friend that committed suicide. And these things all hold weight. And I'm going to say, so I met with Sheriff Smith. I was also in correspondence with San Pete County Sheriff Nielsen. Recently, he resigned and took a position with Cox. And so they are going to have a little election for a new sheriff down there. And we need to get somebody good, somebody who's willing to not fall in line and just be a yes man, somebody who's willing, because the reason I went to the sheriffs is because the sheriffs are our guard against tyranny. They're our last line of defense. When it comes to the people, the sheriff stands in the way between tyranny and us, and he is supposed to defend us.
Yeah, I've always heard that the sheriff is actually a higher authority in a county than even a federal agent or anything would be.
Because state will always take precedence. So when I met with Sheriff Smith and two investigators, it was quite kind of an experience. I had 120 or 30 pages of signatures for a petition to have this investigation.
Okay.
I had a separate file folder, and everything was in hard copy, but again, I have everything PDF'd in separate files. I had a separate one for suicide or high risk. So if I get an affidavit that says, I'm struggling with depression and I have suicide ideation, or my child is experiencing, or my child has attempted suicide, or my child was successful, like anything, anything attempt, ideation, or successes in suicide hold a lot of weight. So if somebody has said, I feel like my children's life is at risk, just even that much, I have put high risk claims into a separate folder. With just the affidavits alone, I had about 500 pages.
Wow.
That they have to go through. And then there's over 100 pages in just the suicide portion.
Wow.
So again, we can have gag orders and confidentiality in case people are concerned about that. I would like to see more from school teachers who are noticing the behavioral changes, or therapists who are saying, I'm having an overwhelming amount of clients come in with XYZ because of mandates. Those kind of statements would be really powerful. And then people in the medical community, I know that they are blacklisted if they come out, but we need people to have the public virtue and the courage to come out and tell the truth so that we can actually make positive changes in society.
Absolutely.
So I had received an affidavit yesterday of a woman who was in Cache Valley, and she has been trying to press like the health department, the fire departments, the police, the hospitals, asking for the records, not specifics, but asking for the numbers, like show me the numbers. She even did a grant request for these numbers, and she sent in her affidavit that the response, not available, not available. Like on every question she asked, she visited with these law enforcement and doctors and everybody. They're like, we've never picked up, like the fire department, we've never picked up anybody for COVID. And and so, it's like, well, so she went out of her way and has been this year and did a beautiful affidavit with all of that information.
Awesome.
And so anyway, that's in a sense, that's what that is. Okay. We're also petitioning the Attorney General, Reyes. I've been in specific correspondence with him. Because he has the responsibility of making sure if something is a major hazard to our state, that he defends the people as well. So I'm getting this everywhere I can. I've sent it into legislators as they're considering laws and lawmaking to say these things are harming people. And and again, the sheriffs and the Attorney General. So I'm working on all of those channels with us.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So an affidavit essentially is basically your testimony of harm, right? So it's like
harm, yes. And also not just harm, but fraud. Like, so if people have witnessed fraud, it's harm and
okay.
or fraud.
Okay.
Now, when I met with Sheriff Smith and the investigators, this is interesting. They said, well, I think they were trying to fill me out to see how much I knew or how much I would do, or if I would
Really?
just give it up, because an affidavit is powerful. Like,
Mm.
they have to investigate that.
Legally.
And yeah, and
Mhm.
I'm not going to pay for a private attorney when our taxes pay for a state attorney.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm enlisting these people to do their jobs. They have an oath to us to
Yeah.
do their jobs.
Yeah.
And so they told me, well, if you have a code, well, okay, so fine, you want to know a code. So on December 21st, after I met with them, I spent a few days reading 413 pages of Utah criminal codes.
Wow.
And I was in a unique position because I found because I had read all these affidavits, I knew what I could put on there. And
Hmm.
so I said, oh, that's a code that violates, I have an affidavit for that. And so I'm very confident, as we said in the beginning, that liberty is to protect life, liberty, or laws are to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
And so I'm very confident in our case and the codes that I have found that have to enforce these things. We are literally putting these people not only in a political or business trial, but we're putting them in a spiritual trial to protect people's sacred liberty.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to keep going with what I can and keep doing. And this is not a campaign that's ending. I have 4 big groups that back me up, Utah groups. And so it's just going to keep going.
Good. And hopefully those who are watching this or listening from outside of Utah, wherever you might be, you can take a cue and maybe they could get in touch with you. I can put, if there's an email or something, I can give them for you, and hopefully they can institute it wherever they are as well.
Yeah. So the email to get this affidavit is thetruthutah@protonmail.com.
Okay.
Again, it's just the 3 words, thetruthutah@protonmail.com. Now, if you just message that, my group is working from different locations. So don't scan anything into that email. I need the hard copies. I'm keeping the hard copies like gold.
Yeah.
And, but that's how you can get the affidavit, and that's how you can contact us. But anybody out of state can take this affidavit and customize it for their state.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and I'll put the links in the show notes as well, so they can just click on and find all the information they might need. But just great stuff, and so glad for you, grateful to you for doing all this work, and to those who are supporting you, because I know it's not it can be a heavy load to carry all on your own, and I think that's been one of the most difficult parts of this last year has been people feeling isolated and feeling alone. So it definitely, like you talked about, kind of reaching out, finding people who were of a like mind is so important. And so that is wonderful. So yeah, I did my affidavit, and hopefully that comes through okay, and hopefully they'll contact me if they have any issues, and we can go from there. But I'll put the link to if you can't go out, if you can't find someone who's willing to meet you, or if you can't find a notary or whatever, I did an online one. It worked great. I had to have a witness there as well, and the time frames that they had available were late because so many people are using their services, I guess. But so I had to do it at like midnight or after midnight, but it's fine. I think if you schedule it maybe a few days in advance, you'd probably be okay to do it during the day. But it worked fine for me. So so that is wonderful. And how are you finding these conversations? Are you encouraged by their responses of the sheriffs or anything?
So I followed through. Again, we're at a standstill with Sanpete County, we need a good sheriff in there, a good sheriff who's, again, willing to do the right thing. But Sheriff Smith, he got back with me a couple of days ago and said that he had sent everything in as protocol to his sergeant, and that team is looking over everything.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't ignore it. And the interesting thing is I feel like I'm just kind of being carried on this journey, and wherever it goes, but God knows He has a servant in me, and I'll do what I can. And again, all we're asking for is a rescindment of the mandates and the rhetoric and the stopping of terrorizing people and focusing on deaths and cases.
Yeah.
Like, just stop. Just stop.
Right.
We don't talk about cancer this way or heart disease this way.
Or the
We
flu,
just,
or
right. Yeah, the flu's
yeah.
cured. We just
Right.
don't, we
Yeah.
need to stop and we need to start focusing on positive things and the exact opposite of what we're doing. Instead of hiding, we need to be outside, getting fresh air, sunshine,
Yes.
communicating with others.
Connecting with each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm just going to keep doing that. I mean, I've had some really cool opportunities to be on radios and, yeah. I have a talk show live tonight to do that. And
Oh yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, several different podcasts. And, and it's interesting that the 4 big groups back me up because they don't always agree. Those
Really?
leaders of those groups don't always agree on what needs to be done, but every single one of them, even the hardest of ones to convince, have allowed, me to kind of piggyback on their efforts and have supported. So there is something to this. This is easy. It's easy to do.
Yeah.
You owe it to yourself. We owe it to our children, the future of our state.
Yeah.
And it's we the people. We have the answer. We are the answer. It's not, your government's not going to come and wave a magic wand. Honestly, I'm not asking for the governor to give us permission. It's really stupid to have permission.
Yes.
I shouldn't have to have. And I compiled out of those 413 pages, I compiled 30 pages of codes, 30 pages of codes that corresponded. And before each code I said, we the people of Utah witness that we have experienced XYZ. And I just, summarized, and it has violated this code and our rights. And so, they have their hands full with our case. Yeah. And I want to keep putting the pressure on them and keep flooding with them with, again, with these affidavits. We owe it to our state.
Yes,
so.
I agree. And so if they ignore it, will be, I mean, they can't legally ignore it. So
legally they can't ignore it.
Right. So
they can't ignore it. And somebody somewhere has to do their job. And as I continue to have public speaking engagements, these names are mentioned. If they're not doing their job, they're at risk for not being reelected.
Yeah.
At bare minimum, they're at risk for not being reelected. So I don't mean harm or ill will on anybody. Right. I'm not trying to, if you want restitution, if you feel like you've been harmed and you want restitution, then people need to go about that on their own. That's not what I'm doing. So again, it's just a matter of just leave us alone, and government needs to get out of the way so that we can be a free people and
protect our freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm about.
That's great. So, and those who, and you've mentioned this a couple of times, those who feel like they don't really have a grievance or they can't point to anything. I didn't necessarily feel like I could point to a lot of specific things, but I came up with a couple. And so I think that if you kind of and some of it is just realizing that it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be,
right.
Oh, I was, like accosted at some store because I wasn't wearing a mask because I have, some kind of medical condition that doesn't allow me to, or whatever. It doesn't have to be something like that. It can be your own emotional state being impacted, if you're experiencing the stress, or if you've, whatever it might be. It can be small, it can be smaller, but it needs.
Yeah, exactly. Because of the mandates that Herbert and Cox have put on the people through acts of terrorism. I'm sorry, but they are. This is domestic terrorism. And sending us texts with emergency alerts. I mean, Who does that? And then getting on the TV and threatening people, like, it's created a psychological effect where people are acting out of fear. And because they're not thinking rationally, they're not treating people charitably. So it's disturbed the peace. Our peace has been disturbed. So just, because Herbert and Cox have caused fear upon the people, I witness that relationships are now strained. Yeah. And it's causing me depression or anxiety or frustration. I mean, whatever that is. But yeah, businesses have been devastated this year. Businesses, churches, like just everything, how we live. From how could people say they don't have a story when this is touched so much. This is not an anti-mask movement. This is a freedom for
pro-freedom.
Pro-freedom,
Right.
Pro-choice.
Right.
Absolutely.
If you want to wear a mask, that's fine. Totally, you can do that. But to your point is that it can't be mandated.
Yeah. Well, we can't force people. You can't legislate morals. You can't legislate how people interact with each other.
I mean, history, the books of history, I think, tell us a very scary story when government takes massive action in response to fear or a perceived fear, whether they create it or not. And so at very least, I think we've got to be aware of that fact and be very thoughtful and really examine everything that's going on and make sure that we are making good and right decisions, because, like you mentioned earlier, there has to be, what did you say, due process, right? And there hasn't been. It's just, here are all of these cases, you are a danger, you better do these things.
Right. For them to tell us that thousands of people could die and that we're at risk and that we're going to hurt people by going outside and we're a threat to others. I mean, how does that not incite harassment or negative feelings between people? It just, people who can and people who can't. There is not a blanket cure for this. There can never be. That's like a medical doctor coming out. If anything, the medical community knows how individual everybody is.
Yeah.
Not everybody who's depressed should be prescribed Prozac. Yeah. And not everybody who has an infection should get what is it?
Like antibiotics, you mean?
Like an antibiotic, but there's a specific one, and I'm allergic to it. Penicillin.
Oh, right.
I'm terribly allergic to penicillin. Mm-hmm. And so we can't blanket society on everything and just assume everybody needs to be doing the same thing.
Yes. And that, I mean, we don't want to necessarily run down this rabbit hole, but the vaccine issue, and that speaks to that issue enormously, that there is no good one size fits all medication. Yeah. And that's never really taken into account with vaccination, not just this new one, but any previous either. People are not tested first to make sure that they don't have a pre-existing underlying
condition or an allergy or
or a gene mutation or something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So but anyway, so that's just great stuff. Thank you so much for doing all that work and for coming on and talking about it. And anything that you want to leave with that you haven't mentioned already, or you can talk about where people can find you or find more information about you, and I'll put it in the links in the description and anything, but anything you want to close with?
Well, I think this has been a great opportunity. And really, I'm just trying to help people understand what is our civic duty. Yeah. Our civic duty is to be involved. And there are people who are donating hours upon hours of time to be active. You can find me on Telegram. You can find me on Facebook for however much longer till they ban me. I mostly post my opinions, though. I'm not usually flagged or censored on there. But we're it's hard to find people with different platforms being shut down.
Yeah.
So and really, the Truth Utah, that's a great, the Truth Utah protonmail.com. Go to there, get your affidavit there, and feel free to ask any questions you have.
And I did that, and I don't know if it was you or whoever was responding, but it helped me quite a bit when I was trying to figure out if you feel confused by this, and I get overwhelmed by like a legal language, and so I was like, what is this exactly? So I just emailed and it was helpful. So
good. Yeah. So that's my coworker working on that. She's actually the author of the affidavit. She's a naturopathic doctor.
Oh, fantastic.
And she's the one that wrote this. And so she's kind of helping with that. And I'm more in charge of the publicity and
Okay.
She's been banned from social media. So
Of course.
of
Yes.
course.
I'd like to talk to her sometime. So anyway, that's fantastic. Thank you again. Thanks for being on, and we'll put this out and hopefully continue to share these things that we both are so passionate about and feel are so important, and continue to fight for and protect our freedoms and just continue moving forward. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's been great.
great. Thanks, Alena.